Well,
all right.
Speaking of country, as you mentioned.
Yeah, Iris DeMent and her debut album we're going to cover right here. But probably first, I should probably tell you what is going to be in each of the things. So I know that I picked Our Town for montage, and I think I ended up going with When Love Was Young for right now. So let's give it a little bit of a listen.
That I'd be here with you, wishing I was free. I never dreamed today would come when love was young.
There we go. So a little bit of deep cut there for you, but
let me get some numbers in here, John. Yeah. Infamous Angel by Iris DeMent comes in at number 2085 in the 1990s on Best Ever Albums, number 213 in 1992, number 12,238 of all time. It is Iris DeMent's highest rated album on Best Ever Albums. Did not make Rolling Stone's list, and Iris DeMent comes in at number 3,646 overall artists on Best Ever Albums artist rankings.
So yeah, this is album number 1 of 7 total for Iris DeMent. So to give you an idea, from 1992. So this starts her career. In terms of artists that are listed as being similar to her, I don't think there's going to be some surprises. Some names that might be familiar to you are Emmylou Harris, Lucinda Williams, Patsy Cline, someone we haven't covered yet, but we will be covering, Gillian Welch down the road, Roseanne Cash, and Mary Chapin Carpenter, who was a country artist around this time, are considered there. Influences, in terms of females, we're looking at, as we mentioned before, Patsy Cline. Actually, Suzanne Vega is listed as an influence, which is interesting. Emmylou Harris. And then on the male side of things, someone who is a huge champion for her, John Prine, which makes sense when you think about it, Graham Parsons, and the name that I wrote down as the thing that popped out to me, Townes Van Zandt, from all the way back in episode number 1, and followed by people like we met the aforementioned Gillian Welch and Ryan Adams were some people that were influenced in terms of this lane. So Iris DeMent, interesting career. She was born in Arkansas, a town called Paragould, Arkansas, on January 5th, 1961, which makes her 63 right now. I should mention that the genres she's considered to be a part of are country, folk, Americana, folk, alternative country, and gospel. I think some of them more so on this one than others, and then later I think some of those other genres might, like for example the alt country label was not as present here, but comes later. So she is the 14th and youngest child of Pat DeMent and Flora May.
Jeez.
Flora May, despite having 14 kids, lived to the ripe old age of 93 and died in 2011. So she's on this album, but 93. Her father, for living in rural Arkansas, you figure without maybe the best healthcare and stuff, he did pretty well for himself too, because he lived from 1910 to 1992, which I believe makes him, is that 82? I believe he was. So
good math, John.
Yeah, good genes there. Her mom had wanted to start a singing career, but I'm guessing those 14-year-old kids, 14 kids, or essentially 14 kids,
puts a
not 14-year-old
damper on
kids,
things. Yeah.
puts a damper on it a little bit in terms of doing that. They said when I read it was like the plans went on hold when she got married, but I'm guessing that shortly after getting married,
really.
I don't know when that would have been, but it was a Pentecostal household, so I'm guessing surprisingly young would be my guess in terms of where it is. I do think it's interesting that, like, despite being Pentecostal, her family moved from Arkansas to Los Angeles when she was 3 years old, which you don't think of as being a move that many people make. And so growing up, there were 2 types of music that were in around the house all the time. Do you guys want to take a guess as to what those 2 types of music were?
Country and Western.
Yes. Nope.
Gospel.
Country is correct. Gospel is the other. Yes. Country and gospel, my friend.
Isn't that that's a line from something. I listened to both the musics, country and Western.
Yes, that's
a
classic
movie or
line
something.
right there. Yeah. That's an old saying. Yeah. So singing, she was singing at age 5 as one of the Little DeMent sisters. And her first time performing, she actually forgot her words. The song, which caused her to avoid performing in public for a long time. So, and then it's really interesting because then she kind of just lives a normal life, right? She graduates high school. She goes to Kansas City to attend college from LA. She's waitressing. She's typing. And then she just at age 25 is driving through a Midwestern town. And I'm sure there's more to it than this, but like I searched around to see, but it sort of was like normal life, then 25 happens. And what ends up happening is she's driving through a Midwestern town. She decides to write down some stuff. She writes the song Our Town, she says, with little to no revisions, and begins realizing, I think I might have a talent for writing songs. So she begins to do open mic nights and actually moves to Nashville in 1988 after doing this. So in 1988, okay, just to take you back, she was born in 61, so she was 27 when she makes that move, right? So 25, she writes Our Town. She works with a producer named Jim Rooney, and they end up getting a record contract, and she makes her debut at the age of 31. So I immediately was trying to think like other artists that have like late arriving careers. And the person who came to mind initially was Bill Withers, right? Was the other guy we talked about having like a late start. He have like an army career and then kind of realized, oh, I could do this singing thing and kind of
like Lucinda Williams too, kind of.
Lucinda Williams a little bit, but she was like a lifer in terms of doing stuff. She just didn't hit. Yeah. Townes Van Zandt was another guy who kind of like lived a life and didn't do it. That's why he came to mind as well. So anyway, this is her debut, Infamous Angel, and it was pretty much universally acclaimed. It did not get really any support from country radio at all, which is kind of amazing in some ways, but I guess where country was at in 1992.
Yeah.
Kind of like what we heard with Lucinda Williams or what was the album, Matt, that you and I did? Male singer from 88, Steve Earle. Right. Yes. Another one that you would think it would get more play, but it wasn't. But there were a lot of artists floating around in country that seemed like they should have been played, but country just didn't have a space for them, I think, at this point, or at least mainstream country didn't. And so almost like alternative rock or alternative music or indie music, right, eventually ends up adopting all of these people, right, and creating a new lane of country throughout the 90s, which we're going to see a lot.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those things that goes back to like when the Byrds had Graham Parsons and they like, the country fans and, population didn't want to accept them as country. And the rock fans didn't want to accept them as rock, either. But
they were interlopers. They weren't from there. This woman's from rural Arkansas.
That's true.
And a Pentecostal household, writing about rural. I'll save some of that for later because I have some thoughts on that. But you know what I'm saying? Like Graham Parsons and the Byrds were like, here's all these people from like California, like and stuff, and they're doing our music, right? Like you don't even have that here. This is sort of like she's got the bona fides.
Right. Yeah.
So. As does, by the way, like Steve Earle and stuff there. Like, I think it's kind of like a little's your political leanings, I think, at that time, too. I think is a thing that stands out with that. But anyway, I've got a lot to say about this album that will tie into parts of the bio. So I'm going to hold off on talking about it till my time discussing it. I'm going to give, I think it's just Matt gets the first take on this one, I think. So, Matt, have at it.
Yeah, this would have, if anybody here that might have heard of this before, it probably would have been me. And yeah, I got nothing. This was not, I never heard of her before. So yeah, really, it's easy for me to fall right in step with this. Musically, it's certainly it's country. Yeah, it's definitely getting some a little reminiscent of like the Dolly Parton and the Loretta Lynn records that we covered way back when. And I did like her voice. I think Sherry was a little put off by her voice, and so I'm like, I kind of get that, right? There's a little bit of there's not a yarl with her voice. We keep talking about that before, but there is there's an interesting vibrato that's a little
like an Appalachia to it.
Yeah.
It's a little
I wrote
piercing.
Warbly.
Warbly,
like
not a yarl. Warbly.
Yeah.
But it's a little bit because of the pitch as well. It's a little bit. There's a twang for sure, but there's a little bit of a piercing nature to it, right? That my guess is if you don't have, it's one of those things that if you didn't have the mix set up right on your stereo, if maybe there was too much treble or not enough bass or something like that, it would be more off-putting, or it would like make you cringe a little bit if it's the mix is not done well. So I get that, but I've listened to enough of this stuff that I'm okay with like that type of vocal styling for the most part. And I was immediately from the get-go, the very first song, Let the Mystery Be, I'm like, I know this song, right? Because it's the theme song from The Leftovers, from the second season of that show. I don't know if guys ever saw that. It's the 3-season show on HBO. And I was like, and I remember
our town famously was in the final credits of Northern Exposure, which got it like exposure there. That's
okay. Yeah. So it was kind of interesting. Like right away, I'm like, I have no idea who this is. And as soon as the song came on, I was like, that's from that show. And I remember when I saw that show, I remember hearing the song and I was like, that's a cool song. I mean, it's not just the music, but it fit in really well with the show, right? Which is about essentially the rapture, a bunch of people like, kind of wondering where everybody went because most of the population disappears. And the song's all about like, let the mystery be, like this is what happens to us when we die, essentially. And I thought the lyrics are clever for that. And for a non-lyrics guy, like throughout this album, I was finding lyrics here and there that resonated with me more so than other artists usually. And I think one of the reasons for that is it's just because of the stripped down nature of this music and the vocals being so upfront and fairly easy to understand. It's it's easier for me to pay attention to lyrics there. So I like that. I liked Our Town a lot. That was a great little ditty, kind of, I guess it's more of the upbeat type of song, right? Like a campfire kind of song that a bunch of people would kind of like at least musically get down with. But then there's also more somber songs, and particularly After You're Gone. And that was a song, I was listening to that for the first time in the car. And it was one of those things I was kind of like drifting off my attention, kind of going to and from, from music to driving and just whatever my thoughts were. And like towards the end, I'm kind of like, I think this might be something I want to pay attention to more. So I started the track over again, and I was like definitely focusing on the lyrics. And it was one of those moments where it just hit me in a way that like I got a little emotional. I was like a little teary eyed actually, which doesn't really happen a whole lot with me with music, but it's basically it's a love song about losing, a loved one, right? Whoever that might be. And it's just about, how you're still going to have laughter after they're gone, but you've memorized every line on their face, and nothing's going to take that away in the stories that it tells. Whatever the way that she strung the lyrics together was just, it just caught me in a moment that can happen sometimes, and I was like, man, that was great. That was a really powerful song. So the lyrics can hit me in a way that gets me to that point. It can happen. It's rare, but it happened here, And yeah, this is a timeless, this is one of the oldest genres that we're probably, ever going to hear on this. I mean, this goes way, way back to, this is Americana, right? The beginnings of music in this country, and, country music, gospel for sure as well. So it's nothing new. And it's in a sense, it's very timeless, even though it's very old, but you still can do music like this today, whether it's like kind of a country element, it's bluegrass too. I was getting there's a little bit of bluegrass, to this, not full blown bluegrass, but enough to kind of be in that vein as well. And, it's like a palate cleanser. Like I can always come back to this for artists that I don't know. And just be with it. So yeah, it's hard for me not to like something like this. It's just very, and it's at a good length, right? 38-28, John, I think is the length that I'm seeing here. So that fits into your 35 Correct. To 42, window.
It is the one album this week that does, although the Morrissey album comes close as well.
That wasn't, I think that was closer. Yeah. A little about 40 or so. So yeah, never heard of her. Would definitely check out some of her other stuff. Thumbs up for me for sure.
Yeah, it's crazy how like out of time this album feels like. It reminds me of the music when they did "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou." It's kind of like this music from a bygone era type of, early American Southern music, and that's what it could be. I would never been able to place this from 92. I would have been like, okay, it could have been from the 70s or from the 30s, or this
could have come out yesterday as well, too, right?
Exactly.
It's like
so I guess that's a testament to the longevity of or the kind of, the mass appeal or the way that this music can just keep going. And I think she's a really good songwriter. There's the song titles kind of give a hint as to the wordplay or the kind of turn of phrase that she has in them. Hotter than Mojave in my heart, or 50 miles of elbow room. They're just infamous angel. That's not a phrase or something that you hear every day, and so it kind of makes you take notice. I get what you're saying about the voice, Matt. I kind of went back and forth on whether or not I was annoyed by it or it bothered me. I think I just ended up on the side of, I liked it overall. She's definitely got the Southern twang. I feel like that doesn't always apply in country music, or you don't always hear that nowadays. I think people try and get rid of their accents for a lot of music, but I guess I would describe this as like rustic or quaint type of country music. It's got this down home feel, Appalachian, deep South type of sound and feel to it. And it was, it doesn't reinvent the wheel, but it does what it does really well. We've said that about other albums in this decade and past decades. I like the stripped down nature of it. It's basically her and acoustic, and then I think there's a kind of multiple musicians throughout, but there's a mandolin that definitely makes an appearance that is distinct, and I don't know, it's just this classic country feel. And
dobro and fiddles are on this too.
Yeah, all those kind of classic country instruments. This is all well-worn territory, but done well. Mama's Opry, that's another kind of one that was a turn of phrase, interesting lyrics, a tribute to her mother and her wanting to be famous, like you mentioned, John. But it's a solid album. It didn't blow me away. I probably should have given it more listens. Maybe it wasn't something that kind of like hit me right away in the same way it did for Matt, but I enjoyed it. It was pleasant, and it's just I agree. It was a nice kind of change of pace from the rest of the albums that we've talked about recently. So I'm gonna give it a mild thumbs up.
I would say too, I definitely liked her voice better than her mother's, who I believe sang the last song.
Yeah.
I was not a fan of Mom's voice. Props to her for pumping out 14 kids and living
in her 70s, like so.
Yeah, it was like, but it was still touching, I guess. So
Yeah, I have a lot of like loose thoughts about this album. I enjoyed this album. I'll give you some of my loose thoughts though. Number one, I continue to be amazed that an album like this wasn't massive in country music. It just seems like it has everything you'd want. And if you were in the 70s, right, or even the early part of the 80s and mid 80s, this is exactly what you would have wanted out of your country. But I guess just what country had become by this point. She just was sort of, we talked about her being anachronistic in her time, and she was anachronistic in that time too. Not just as classic, goes back to the beginnings of Americana, right? Like 20s and 30s type, but also anachronistic from even like what country music was in the 60s, 70s, and parts of the 80s, right? So it just really interests me. And also how this sound is just creeping into the 90s and existed completely out of my frame of reference, right? In the night, like I know, like we did the Jayhawks, and we're gonna do all these alt country groups and groups around the side, and like Lucinda Williams we did, and Steve Earle,
and Garth Brooks. That was in our first episode this decade,
right? But Garth Brooks represents like what I was saying, that she's not.
That she's not.
So like I want to draw a distinction between Garth Brooks and like all of what I was just mentioning, because what I'm saying is there's this whole like genre of country music that by the time the 2000s hits, I'm deeply familiar with it. It feels like it's influencing everything, and then obviously by the time the 2010s happens, you've got like tons of this Americana-y type stuff with country like there, and being on TV commercials like the Lumineers and Mumford and Sons and all that stuff, like variations of this that I am not as much of a fan of this. So I would that's the first thing that comes to mind. Second is, it's really interesting to listen to an album that I think has really well-written songs, but also that I do not relate to any of them. It's like listening to someone else's story that I like these songs in the way that you read a book about someone that's not like you at all. And you're like, oh, it's interesting. Let me tell you about your story. So I think these stories are very touching, and it obviously moved even our non-lyrics guy, right? It's Matt, and he was able to connect with it. But all of these songs, is not the right word to use, voyeur, because that's not what it is. But it's like taking a slice of life, like, oh, like this is rural life. And I quickly realized, like, yeah, I obviously can't connect with rural life because I've never lived in a rural area, nor... like at any point, right? And honestly would not choose to live in a rural area, not in a negative way, but just it's the things that appeal, right, about that are not mine. But I was touched by the songs because there's a sincerity. There's a directness to her writing and a sincerity to it that is very touching. I mean, it's classic, like, what I think of as like country rhyme scheme though. Like I think of country rhyme scheme, it's like you hit your first word, right? And then you give some words and then you hit the thing that sounds like it either. So like I think of like Our Town as a good example of that. It's like, kiss it goodbye, but hold on your lover cause it's bound to die. And you hit the bye and the die, and then it's like, later it's like sun setting down on our town, and it's like you're hitting, you're giving like the rhyme. The other one is like, he was the tender and I ordered a beer. It's been 40 years and I'm still sitting here, and it's like kind of like you hit the thing, and also her pronunciation of words are fascinating at different times. Yeah. The one that stood out to me was the one I picked, right? When Love Was Young. And sometimes there's these interesting like vowels that either end words or begin words that don't have vowels at the beginning or the end, but a vowel sound comes, which I think is like the Appalachia of it. Which takes me into another thought I had, which is Matt last week said he tends to prefer female R&B singers over male ones, a theme that is not the case for me. I'm an equal opportunity R&B guy, but I have learned if you're going to have a twang and sing country, you might as well be a woman, because the stuff that annoys me with men twang, it doesn't annoy me as much with I don't know why. Like I can listen to her or the Dixie Chicks or Dolly Parton or Loretta Lynn, or I can keep going, right? And the twanginess does not bother me. But you give me like the similar like Nashville twang or different stuff like that, and it just it drives me a different direction. It doesn't though drive me as much into distraction in the outlaw country. So maybe that's the better parallel for a unique singing voice. I also couldn't help but draw a distinction with her voice and Tony Childs, who we covered. But even though this is an atypical voice, I did not mind this at all, because I think it meshed with the theme of the sound and the style of music, which sort of always has had a little bit of that mountain twang to it. So there's another thought. Final loose thought right here. Having grown up near New York and Philadelphia, two places with strong accents, I never really thought of music having like New York accents, even like New York artists, right? Like the Velvet Underground or the Ramones. I guess the closest I could get to something sounding like a New Yorker or a Boston person, right, is like hip hop. But we've covered a ton of Boston bands, right? And like you hear like almost no accent. We've covered a ton of British bands, and some have accents, but they stand out. And most have loose, accents at different times. I find it fascinating when someone can sing with this aggressive of an accent. And it's really like the mountain region and the South is kind of the only place I can think of that has that the accent carries over to the music in American music. I guess you could say California a little bit. Like we covered like Dennis Wilson, right? And or the Eagles, right? Sound a little Californian. But can you guys think of like other parts of the country where you're like, oh, that sounds like somebody from that part of the thing, in the way that you immediately recognize an artist from the coal country or, the upper South, you know what I mean? The Ozarks, Appalachia.
Only when it's like country's like the best example of that, because that's part of the sound. It's like you lean into that accent.
But Southern rappers sound Southern in a way that rappers from other parts of the country don't.
Yeah,
like
that's true.
Juvenile and Outkast sound Southern, but if I said to you, like, where's LL Cool J from? you'd be like, well, New York, but could you tell by how he taught? Kind of.
Sometimes.
And you kind of can tell that, like,
yes.
Notorious B.I.G. and Nas. That's what I was saying. It may be hip hop. Is it? But
well,
could
those,
you tell
but you're also
from New York, or the Ramones are from New York.
But it's speaking. It's like hip hop's more speaking. It's not really singing, and I think that's probably
or Frank
part of the
Sinatra's
distinction.
from New Jersey, or Bruce. Would you know Bruce Springsteen was from New Jersey?
No, but I think
like
that's
Dinosaur Jr. or the Pixies were from Boston.
No, but I think that's part of what I'm saying is like there's something. And British bands, I've always thought that with the Beatles. You know, they have really thick Liverpool accents, and then they sing, and most of the time it's drowned out. And there's something about when you're singing that kind of normalizes or just puts all the accents on an even playing field. But country is you're leaning into it because that's part of the sound. In hip hop, it's not. You're not really singing. It's more in line with speaking. So those accents are probably going to be more pronounced. But I think there's something with just a natural singing voice is kind of like it doesn't really come out as much.
Well, even Elvis and even Southern rock bands like the Black Crowes and the Kings of Leon and stuff, you can immediately identify them as Southern.
Yeah,
in the way they sing.
Well,
it's just something very like in a way that you can't like identify Iggy Pop as being from Detroit, or Michael Jackson as being from Detroit, or Slipknot as being from Iowa. You know, like just these are Metallica, right? As being from Northern California.
I don't know what an Iowan accent sounds like.
Right, it's flat, you know. But I just, you know what I'm saying? It's just you can't in a way that you can from the South. And I just like listening to this, I'm like, wow, it really is a unique deal.
That's part of the, like I think Matt said this, it's part of the identity of the music too. Like the Southern accent is almost like a welcome addition to country music in some ways. And I think that may be true in other like countries. Maybe they have different, they have different dialects or regional differences. I wonder if that same kind of thing applies to their like classic like folk music of like French people or something. I don't know.
Nashville country was you started taking it out of the traditional areas, and you either had like upper middle class Southerners or and eventually it evolved like Canadians and Australians and Pennsylvania, mid Pennsylvania people like Taylor Swift. You know what I mean? It like became kind of like omnipresent, and that Southernness stripped away from it a little bit. Go figure. Yep. So those are all my things. That's a lot of loose thoughts. I would say I enjoyed this album. It doesn't in any way scream 1992, but not in a bad way. And I just think it's just the best comparison I could compare it to was if you want it, like sonically, it sounds similar to like Lucinda Williams or Steve Earle. It's sort of in that lane of what they were doing, but I think in terms of the way she's writing songs, it so reminded me of Townes Van Zandt and John Prine were the two people that I immediately thought of. And when I found out that John Prine was someone who championed her and sang with her later in the 90s, it's like, well, yeah, that's clearly
we covered one of
sense.
His albums way back when, right?
Oh yeah, his self-titled, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's what I said, like, and both of those I liked, and both of them I liked because of the plain spokenness of the tales, and there was a gravitas to simple stories. So,
and I was getting much more of a my initial reaction was like, oh, Dolly Parton, Loretta Lynn, like that's kind of where I was taken back.
There's not as much playful. There's more earnestness certainly than Dolly Parton's always sort of winking at.
I'm talking about more about the sound, like the sound and the
sound. Vocally, because she's from coal country, and and the Ozarks and coal country are kind of an overlap culturally, and so is Loretta Lynn, coal miners. So like they're all sort of have a back, but they wrote very different. Now I think some of the songs that Iris DeMent writes later are going to be like Loretta Lynn because she starts to write songs about. And there's some subversion on this. There's a lot of songs about religion and not being fully signed up for, like the first song in particular, it's kind of, soft, but like Let the Mystery Be is sort of like people are telling me they're going to come back to the garden and stuff like that. But you know what? I think I'll just let the mystery be a little bit and stuff. And so I won't say it's subversive, but she's kind of giving you the DNA that like later, her third album in particular is kind of like the thing where she starts to push into some more, I think, like political stuff, which I'm sure did her no favors in terms of a Nashville, right? Like following, but in some ways a little bit of what she trods on. I found a lot of the Dixie Chicks narrative in her. a little bit. You know what I mean? Where they had the bona fides in the background to make the music, right? And came from the area, but then also started to like grow because they existed outside of it a little bit and were able to sort of transcend it as well, or have nuance, I think. So yeah. But we'll get to them much later, and maybe we'll compare and contrast then.
The only other thing that I picked up on is you're talking about vocal stylings and stuff. When she sings when Love Was Young, I thought she sounded a little like Barry Gibb from like early Bee Gees stuff. She had like that.
Well, she takes a different approach. I like that song, but like I said, there were weird beginnings and ends of, like, if you go back and listen to the beginning and end of words. There's like a rounded off way she says all the different words, right? I described it as like sounding like a vowel on the front end and end because it's like sort of blurry. I didn't get Barry Gibb necessarily. But
it's more of the like the way that the voice is trembling, or the warble, like the little. It was a little bit of a ballad Barry Gibb from like from that pre-disco Bee Gees, is what I was hearing.
Well, and I'll end with one last thing. Did you know the Goo Goo Dolls song Iris was named after her?
I did not know that.
So
okay, I did not know that.
So
well, I like this album more than the Goo Goo Dolls.
Nice little cherry on the top there.
Yeah,
I do too, but I figured I'd throw that one in just so you would know.